Lecture 18, Part 2, LBJ and the Great Society. So I was talking when we ran out on the previous video about the election of 1964. Told you about the Republican candidate, Barry Goldwater, and we looked at the election map and showed the significance of how this is when the Solid South started to break up. Okay, and Southerners started considering that you could vote for Republicans. It didn't mean the end of the world. Unfortunately, some Southerners voted for Goldwater maybe for the wrong reason, because he had voted against the Civil Rights Act of '64. But they're misunderstanding what his opposition to was. But anyway, we've already talked about that. This is when the Solid South starts to break up. There's two significances to this election. If we were doing ID SIG, so I was asking for significance. There's like three to this significance. Three significances to this election. First, the breakup of the Solid South. Okay? Second, I told you, Goldwater was very, very conservative. Okay? And he's gotten his clock cleaned in this election. So one significance of this election is it gave kind of the establishment in the Republican Party, the movers and shakers, very much have fear of running another conservative. Okay, even today, your Republican establishment will tend to back someone like a John McCain or a Mitt Romney, someone from the more liberal side of the party, and because parties have long memories. They remember that in 1964 they ran a really staunch conservative and they got their teeth kicked in. Okay? So the movers and shakers in the Republican Party today tend to gravitate more towards, your more moderate type Republicans, like a Mitt Romney. Okay? So that's the significance. They forget that Ronald Reagan ran in 1980 as a staunch conservative and won. They forget that part, but they remember Goldwater getting cleaned out. Okay? And here's another significance of this election. I just mentioned Ronald Reagan. Now, Ronald Reagan had been an actor, did a lot of westerns. He was kind of what they call the B-movie actor. They weren't the really high-dollar films. They tended to be the second-tier films. But he was quite a conservative fellow, and he was campaigning for Goldwater in this election. He would go out and give speeches. Reagan was a good speaker, and so he would go out and campaign on behalf of Goldwater, because obviously Goldwater can't be everywhere, and people would want to come hear Reagan speak because he was a famous actor. Right? And here's where you start to see Reagan kind of emerging as a political figure. Okay? He's known for being an actor, and then he starts getting into politics and gets more and more involved in it. And eventually he'll be elected governor of California. And then later he'll be elected president. Unfortunately, we'll run out of semester before we get to Reagan. That's life in the big city, okay? So 64 is kind of significant for three reasons. Breaking up of the Solid South, this Democratic stronghold. Defeat of the staunch conservative, which makes the Republican hierarchy leery of conservatives, and then the emergence of Ronald Reagan. Okay. Now, with a win like this, with Johnson getting 61% of the popular vote, now he has that political mandate, whereas for like the previous year, he was just kind of filling out Kennedy's term. But now he's been elected with a very strong majority, and this, of course, carries a lot of people into Congress with him. Okay, so now he's got majorities in Congress he needs to get legislation passed, and you can point to this overwhelming election, right? And use that as an argument. Obviously the people will like what I want to do. And so Johnson will go about trying to build what he calls this great society. Remember, a war on poverty. Okay? Like a New Deal type ideas that the government can be an instrument of change and take care of social problems. Now, the last great piece of the civil rights puzzle comes out after the election in 1965, and that's the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And this is huge. Okay? Now remember, the 15th Amendment said you couldn't deprive people of the right to vote based on race. And we talked about, though, that Southerners came up with other strategies, poll taxes, okay? Literacy tests, okay? And other ways to try to disfranchise people. I think it was in Mississippi where at one time, like, the percentage of blacks who were eligible to vote, they were actually registered to vote, was like a single digit. Okay, it was that the states had done everything they could to disfranchise, to take away political power from the African Americans. Right? The Voting Rights Act of '65 basically does away with all that. Okay? Now, once again, it takes a little while to dismantle things. There's big voter registration drives in the South to try to get blacks registered to vote. They're sometimes met with violence. A few people came up murdered in Mississippi. There's a movie about this. It's called Mississippi Burning. I've never actually seen it. Anyway, so the Voting Rights Act. If we were writing the essay question on the final, which we're not, I just can't tackle this right now. There's just too much going on with the everything we're having to go through here. All right. But the essay question basically starts in 1954 with Brown versus Ford and ends with the Voting Rights Act of '65, which is the last great legislative piece of the Civil Rights Movement. Now, is there still stuff going on? Yes, but as far as the government's concerned, everything has been kind of taken care of in theory through laws. Okay. It takes a little longer to change people's hearts and minds. Right. So anyway, Voting Rights Act of '65, big deal. Look forward to the vote. Okay. Now, what else is going on? All right. Federal aid to education. All right. Here's where the government starts pouring a lot more money into education. Remember, they had that defense education bill back like after Sputnik, but that was geared more towards colleges. Here's where the federal government starts putting money into elementary school, high school type stuff. Now, the thing is, of course, federal money always comes with strings attached. Okay? So here's how it works. Government takes money from you in taxes, sends it to Washington, keeps a bunch of it to cover overhead, and then sends it back to you and says, we're doing you a favor. And so the government's giving you schools a lot of money, but there's things that come with it. And this is one way they helped speed up the desegregation of the schools, which of course had been called for by Brown versus Board and by the Civil Rights Act. Hey, if you want the money, we need you to jump through these hoops. Okay? So sometimes this works. This also accounts for things like a few years ago, most of you were probably eating some of those horrible lunches in elementary and middle school, but nobody, everybody got a thing of milk whether they wanted it or not, and then the kids don't want the skim milk is healthy. And I've heard that, and I've read that kids were throwing away milk left and right, but the federal government was specifying was you have to give these kids skim milk. Well, they can't make you drink it, can they? But so federal education money kind of sometimes gets the government intruding into school decisions. Okay, good or bad, you decide. All right. Other things being passed around this time as part of the Great Society: Medicare and Medicaid. Now, these are government health programs. They're government health insurance programs, to be specific. Okay? Now, they're separate. Okay. Medicare is health insurance for old people. If you're over 65, guess what? You're on Medicare. Right? And now you pay for this. Some of you have jobs. You look on your paycheck stubs. There's the Medicare deduction. You're paying for this. It goes to help to support Medicare, old age pension, not old age health insurance. Okay. All right. which is good. I mean, people need health insurance when they get old. I mean, this is when you have a lot of your health issues. You would not believe the kind of medical bills my mother had racked up in the last 10 years of her life. But she was on Medicare, so they covered huge chunks of it. Okay, but well, gosh, I'd rather stay on my own private health insurance. Here's the thing: you don't get to choose. You're on Medicare. All right, you're 65. You're on Medicare. They've been taking the money out of your paycheck all these years. You really don't get a say in it. So certainly there will be some people who are against this just based on the whole personal liberty thing. Well, what if I don't want to be on Medicare? What if I want to be on, this? Nope, sorry, you're on Medicare. And then a similar thing is Medicaid. And Medicaid is health insurance for people who are in poverty, basically. And it's possible to be on both. Last few years of my life, my mother was on Medicaid and Medicare. She was already on Medicare because she was over 65. Because of her health issues, she basically ran out of money. And the last couple of years of her life, she was living in a nursing home, paid for largely by Medicaid. So these programs, help a lot of people, but of course, big government programs, there's problems too. For one thing, we've got a lot more old people than we used to, and a lot less young people working. And so Medicare financially is in the same boat as Social Security. We're not sure how long the money's going to last. There's some very iffy things about it. Problem with Medicaid is we get a lot of fraud. Okay, so yes, it helps people, but as soon as you're passing out money, there's always folks who want to game the system. Just a few years ago here in Texas, they busted some doctor who was billing the government for all these supposed services he provided to poor people on Medicaid, and he wasn't really doing it. He was just, he'd bring in a homeless person, talk to him for 5 minutes, and then bill the government for whatever. And it's called Medicaid fraud. And so that happens too. So this is one problem. So every government program, almost every government program you pick, you can find some examples of how it's helped people. But you can also find some examples of how it's hurt people or had some fraud. And this is one of the things that's you have to think about when you're proposing programs. Okay? You can look at it. Somebody once said, you can look at potential laws two ways. One, ideally, what's the best they can possibly achieve, which is good. But someone said you should also look at what's the most harm they can cause. And then you have to balance out. This helped 100 people, but it hurt 10. Okay, you got to be aware of these things. Anyway, that's editorializing, has nothing to do with this, but Medicare, Medicaid with us. Also, you're starting to see in the 60s the beginnings of an environmental movement. People are starting to come to grips with how much pollution has been caused by our industrial society. So you get a Water Quality Act in 1965. There's also a Clean Air Act, where they start looking at ways to maybe try to clean things up a little bit. Okay? So the book probably talks about these. I want to mention this guy real quick. I saw him in the background here. See this guy here? All right. Judging from the photo, I would say that's Vice President Hubert Humphrey. Remember, we met Hubert Humphrey back in the 1948 Democratic Convention. He's the one said that the Democrats need to start thinking about civil rights. Okay. So here he is watching the signing. All right. That ends this slide, so we'll pause here. We'll fire up another set of slides for the next part, which would be part 3.